committee will come to order. The committee meets today to consider the expected nomination of Dr. Kathleen Hicks to be Deputy Secretary of Defense. Thank you all for being here today. Dr. Hicks, welcome. A warm welcome to your husband, Thomas Hicks. We're glad to have you both with us today. And I'd like to acknowledge your children, who I know to be a source of great joy and support you both. Dr. Hicks, you'll be introduced by former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, who joins us virtually. Secretary Gates, are you on there? There he is. All right, Secretary Gates, do you hear me?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman.
You are recognized.
Oh, thank you. Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the Armed Services Committee, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and former colleague, Dr. Kathleen Hicks, as the President's nominee to be Deputy Secretary of Defense. When I was asked to remain as Secretary of Defense by newly elected President Obama, in early 2009, I welcomed Dr. Hicks into the office of the Secretary as Deputy Undersecretary for Strategy, Plans, and Forces. At that point, she'd already spent more than a dozen years in OSD as a career civil servant, rising remarkably fast from presidential management intern to the senior executive service. As a result of that experience, she hit the ground running in 2009. Among other monumental assignments, she led the 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review, a huge and complex task involving statutory requirements, service equities, mountains of analysis, and innumerable organizational interests. Preparing the QDR requires the bureaucratic skill to herd countless defense officials, both military and civilian, into one place, getting them all to agree to a document with significant future strategic and budgetary implications. She did the same with the National Defense Strategy, another consequential intellectual and bureaucratic achievement. In addition, while I was Secretary, Dr. Hicks spearheaded our work in thinking through the long-term challenge from China. And she was in charge of reviewing and preparing for my approval the military plans of the combatant commanders. One of Dr. Hicks' most significant achievements as Deputy Undersecretary began on my watch in 2011. That spring, President Obama asked me to reduce the defense budget by $400 billion, on top of the $400 billion we had already cut in 2009, 2010. I told the President I thought that was a mistake, but of course we would do as he directed. I did persuade him, though, that prior to any such reduction, we should have a strategic review to determine just what the implications of such a cut would be for our military strength and what changes in military strategy would be required. I turned to the one person I thought had the skill to lead such a high-stakes endeavor, and that was Dr. Hicks. Subsequent to my retirement as Secretary in mid-summer 2011, Congress passed sequestration legislation that cut another $600 billion from defense. Thus, the strategic review I had assigned to Dr. Hicks took on even greater importance. The resulting defense strategic guidance issued in January 2012 preserved a sensible military strategy while meeting congressional intent, an extraordinary and rare feat. At a time of significant challenges internationally and great uncertainty surrounding defense budgets and programs, Dr. Kath Hicks is exceptionally well qualified to assist Secretary Austin in realistically ensuring that budgetary decisions and military strategy are integrated in order to fully protect our country. She also has the long experience within and deep knowledge of the Department of Defense, as well as the personal leadership talent to bring together the military and civilian leadership in common purpose. In sum, Dr. Hicks is a superb manager of complex processes and large numbers of people and organizations with competing interests. For her remarkable contributions to the department while I was Secretary, I presented Kath with the Distinguished Civilian Service Award, the highest award for civilians in the Department of Defense. In the citation I wrote, Dr. Hicks strengthened the civilian role in the early phase of strategy and force development, contingency planning, and the promulgation of key department guidance. She skillfully worked with the leadership and staff of the combatant commands, the services, the joint staff, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense to provide superior and timely support to the Secretary on the full range of strategic and programmatic challenges confronting the department. It is with pride in Dr. Hicks and confidence in her tough-mindedness, her experience in defense issues and strategy, and her mastery of bureaucratic black arts in the Pentagon that I introduce her to you today.
Well, thank you very much, Secretary Gates. It's an excellent introduction. And to further introduce and participation in the introduction, we ask Senator Shaheen to make remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Reid and members of the committee. I'm really honored to be here alongside Secretary Gates to introduce President Biden's nominee to be the first woman to serve as the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dr. Kathleen Hicks. This nomination truly is historic, and if approved, Dr. Hicks would be the highest-ranking civilian woman to be confirmed to serve at the Department of Defense. Now, as we meet today, we face complex and challenging national security threats around the world, and Dr. Hicks' extensive career in national security and at the Department of Defense makes her well qualified not only to confront these challenges, but also to handle the day-to-day responsibilities of running the largest federal bureaucracy. As I was talking to folks about Dr. Hicks, she was described to me as someone who grew up at the Pentagon. And given that she began there as a civil servant in 1993, I think that's a pretty accurate description. From 2009 to 2012, she served as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Strategy, Plans, and Forces, and as Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Policy from 2012 to 2013 during the Obama administration. And as we heard from Secretary Gates, he gave, I think, about as glowing an introduction as I've heard on this committee for anyone he has served with. Before taking a lead role on the Biden transition team, Dr. Hicks served as the Senior Vice President at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I had an opportunity to see her management experience and the knowledge and her breadth of national security experience firsthand when we participated in several panels together at the Reagan National Defense Forum, and we discussed topics ranging from everything about assessing our footprint in the Middle East to nuclear weapons. I also had a chance to see very directly her leadership capacity at CSIS when she played an instrumental role in the signing into law the legislation that I worked on, the Syria Study Group, which ultimately produced recommendations and a real comprehensive strategy to address the conflict in Syria. Sadly, our position on Syria changed before many of those recommendations could get implemented. But not only is Dr. Hicks an expert on many of these issues, she also understands the need for more civilian engagement at the Department of Defense. It's one of the topics that we had the opportunity to talk about several weeks ago when we were able to speak about some of the challenges she will face at DOD if she's confirmed. I'm confident that Dr. Hicks will be able to work alongside Secretary Austin to address this challenge and to improve civilian-military relations within the Pentagon. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I believe that Dr. Hicks is the right person for this job right now. Her extensive Pentagon experience, her command of the most challenging national security threats make her a fantastic choice for this role. And I am so pleased to be able to be here to introduce her this morning, and I urge the committee to swiftly confirm her, and let's get her back to the Pentagon where she can do the work that needs to be done. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Excellent introduction. I agree with it all. And Dr. Hicks, it's standard for this committee. There's some required questions that we must ask you, and we ask that you reply in an audible yes or no to each of these questions, okay? Have you adhered to the applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established for requested communications, including questions for the record in hearings?
Yes.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes.
Will those witnesses be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes.
Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify upon request before this committee?
Yes.
You agree to provide documents, including copies of electronic forms of communication in a timely manner when requested by a duly constituted committee, or to consult with the committee regarding the basis of any good faith delay or denial in providing such documents?
Yes.
And lastly, have you assumed any duties or undertaken any actions which would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No.
Well, Dr. Hicks, I don't have to tell you that I believe that we're in the most dangerous time, arguably, in our lifetime. It's the greatest threat the United national security comes from China and Russia. That won't change just because we've got a new administration. The 2018 National Defense Strategy, and I think of all the things that qualify you for this, I think the fact that you are one of the 12 authors of this is most significant, because these 12, 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, all experts in the field, drafted this document that we have used since 2018. If we are serious about the security of our nation, and I believe that you are, we must ensure a strong national defense that will deter China and Russia. Our other top order of business must be making sure our troops have the resources they need to achieve this strategy. Over the past decade, as a result of the Budget Control Act and sequestration, the U.S. military has lost $550 billion of planned spending. Readiness plummeted. Short-sighted cuts across the Pentagon drove talented service members to leave and rendered Pentagon civilians unable to conduct critical oversight activities. As you pointed out when you helped put together the National Defense Committee report, and I'm quoting from it now, civilian voices have been relatively muted on issues at the center of the U.S. defense and the national security policy, undermining the concept of civilian control. Modernization has put on hold while our adversaries rapidly jumped out ahead of us in developing technologies like hypersonics and artificial intelligence to exploit our vulnerabilities. I think I may be the only one old enough to remember, but ever since World War II, we've been in a position to say that we really had essentially the best of everything, and that ceased to be true. And we know what happened during the Obama administration, because I know you were active there, but we actually dropped our military funding by 25% during the last 5 years of that administration, which would have been from 2010 to 2015. So that modernization was on hold. For decades, we starved investments in our nuclear weapons and infrastructure. In stark contrast, China and Russia expanded their stockpiles, building thousands of additional missiles to threaten the United States and our allies. In fact, during that time, the 5-year period that I referred to, China actually increased their activity by some 83%, while we had dropped ours 25%. The 2018 NDS and several years of stable funding, we were on the course correction we needed. Our military has started to recover, but still a long ways to go. President Biden must replace the $550 billion of defense funding cut by sequestration, and Congress will need to work with him to do so. This investment is a down payment required to maintain our position against China and Russia over the next several decades. It will give our military leaders the predictability and certainty that they've asked for time and time again in this very room. Working with the soon-to-be chairman, I will continue to fight for this. And look, Dr. Hicks, our nation needs strong civilian leadership at the Pentagon. You and Secretary Austin must tackle these problems head on, and if we hope to preserve and defend our way of life, we can't afford to backslide. This will be my last meeting to actually chair, and the chairmanship will go to Senator Reid after this. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I join you in welcoming Dr. Hicks to this morning's hearing. And I want to thank her for her willingness to serve again. She served her entire life, it seems, in the defense of the nation. Thank you again for that. Let me welcome your husband, Tom. I know your children are watching this avidly from afar and very proud of their mother. Finally, I want to recognize and thank former Secretary of Defense Bob Gates for his introduction, but more than that, for his extraordinary work as Secretary of Defense under 2 presidents. He's certainly an example of the very best in public service. And let me also recognize and thank my colleague, Senator Shaheen, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Dr. Hicks is a highly regarded national security and defense policy expert with extensive experience in government and the private sector. She has served in senior level positions in the Department of Defense, as well as with public policy research organizations, including her recent tenure as a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This committee has also relied on Dr. Hicks's expertise to shape defense policy and conduct oversight. Her testimony before the committee helped inform the Goldwater-Nichols reforms included in the FY 2017 National Defense Act, and she has also testified on civil-military relations. Most recently, Dr. Hicks served as a member of the National Defense Strategy Commission, which provided valuable analysis for this committee's consideration as we conducted oversight on NDS implementation. If confirmed, Dr. Hicks would be the first woman confirmed by the Senate to serve as the Deputy Secretary of Defense. She is exceptionally qualified for this position, and her background and expertise should serve her well. The Deputy Secretary of Defense position is complementary to the Secretary of Defense and equally critical. The Deputy is focused on the internal management of the department, and it takes considerable skill to administer a large and diverse bureaucracy like the Department of Defense. If done effectively, it can enable the Secretary to focus primarily on establishing defense policy and maintaining alliances and partnerships while developing strategy to counter our competitors. And one of the most consequential decisions for the Deputy Secretary of Defense is how to allocate budget resources for the development of weapons platforms and cutting-edge technologies. This year will be an inflection point in how the department prioritizes the resources it needs to accomplish its missions, given that the fiscal year 2022 budget will not be constrained by the Budget Control Act. Dr. Hicks, as we discussed during our office call, one of the primary challenges you will face is how to transform how the department operates. Transformation includes ensuring the department is postured to face future threats, which means harnessing cutting-edge technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, and cybersecurity, while also divesting of legacy systems that are not optimized for future combat. But transformation also includes becoming more efficient in managing the back office of literally one of the largest bureaucracies in the world. Transformation of the Defense Department is not new and has been tried before, but it inevitably faces obstacles. One complication can be service parochialism, as each military service is responsible for the platforms that are needed to meet mission requirements, and each service has their favorites. Such parochialism can also extend to the civilian components of the OSD staff, making efficiency initiatives difficult. Also, the interest of individual members of Congress can also hinder change, particularly in the retirement of legacy systems. Dr. Hicks, I hope you will share with this committee your thoughts on how you intend to manage this process if you are confirmed. The other issue you'll need to immediately address is filling the civilian vacancies in the department and revitalizing civil-military relations. There are always multiple positions that need to be filled at the start of any new administration. However, I am concerned about the morale in the department, given that the previous administration made a concerted effort to leave multiple senior-level civilian officers unfilled, necessitating the installment of career or mid-level officials into senior positions in an acting capacity. Furthermore, large numbers of experienced career civilians left the department during the past 4 years, leaving a dearth of expertise and increasing the workload on those who remained. Secretary Austin has pledged his commitment to repairing civil-military relations and empowering civilians at all echelons of the department, and if you are confirmed, you will be integral to this effort. Finally, every member of this committee wants to ensure that high-caliber candidates serve in the department, and we will continue to fully evaluate and expeditiously consider nominees for these positions. Filling these vacancies quickly and with capable and talented individuals will ensure the department is operating effectively. I want to thank Chairman Inhofe for working to schedule a prompt confirmation hearing for Dr. Hicks. And Dr. Hicks, if you are confirmed, I hope you will work closely with Secretary Austin to fill these positions and provide steady leadership for the department. Dr. Hicks, we face many challenges that will require strong leadership and the ability to make tough decisions. Thank you again for your willingness to serve our country. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Reed. With some senators attending remotely, I want to let everyone know how we're going to run things. Since it's not possible to know exactly when our colleagues who will be joining us via computer, when they arrive, we will not be following our standard early bird timing rule. Instead, we'll handle the order of questions by seniority, alternating side to side until we've gone through everyone. We will do the standard 5-minute rounds, and I ask my colleagues on the computers to please keep an eye on the clock, which you should have on your screen. And finally, to allow for everyone to be heard, whether in the room or on the computer, I ask all colleagues to please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. Dr. Hicks, will begin with your opening statement. You are recognized.
Well, good morning, Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, and committee members. I am honored to come before you today as President Biden's nominee for Deputy Secretary of Defense. I'm grateful to the committee for your stewardship of the National Defense Authorization Act over the past 60 years. Your effective bipartisan governance is a ballast for American national security. I want to thank you, Senator Shaheen, for your words of support. As the first woman elected to the Senate from the state of New Hampshire and the first woman to become that state's governor, you are a model to all those who aim to break barriers. And Secretary Gates, thank you for your generosity in introducing me today. It was an honor to work for you when you served as secretary, and if confirmed, I hope to follow your example of principled leadership. My deepest thanks go to my husband, Tom, whose love and support have been my anchor for 27 years. Our greatest joy is our 3 children, who teach me patience and humility routinely. I'm also grateful for my large and formidable Irish-American family. My parents' lifetime of service to the United States Navy set a standard of selflessness for all of us. I am honored to sit before you today in the hopes of carrying on that family legacy of service. If confirmed, I would be returning to a department where over much of the past 3 decades, I worked alongside dedicated women and men, civilian and military. I could not be prouder at the prospect of serving with them once more. The overriding mission of the Defense Department is to deter adversaries and defend the United States and her citizens. Challengers who seek to undermine America's interests by force should never doubt our resolve or readiness to thwart their aims. The department is most effective when it is working in concert with other tools of national power. Our military strength bolsters the work of our diplomats, reinforces our alliances and partnerships, and strengthens our prosperity. If confirmed, foremost among my charges would be to help translate the rhetoric of strategic competition into the reality of execution. China is the pacing challenge of our time. Armed conflict between the United States and China is not desirable, and it is not inevitable. The U.S. military plays a critical role in preventing that outcome. We must stand ready today, and we must modernize if deterrence is to endure. If confirmed, I would seek to increase the speed and scale of innovation in our force. The Defense Department cannot do this alone. It must engage Congress, expand public-private partnerships, and work with America's allies and partners. Our greatest military strength is America's total force, supported by its military families. We must not forget that the Defense Department's workforce is America's workforce. The pandemic has tested the U.S. military just as it has tested all Americans. The Defense Department has a vested interest in leaning into COVID response efforts as President Biden has directed and Secretary Austin has committed. But most challenges facing the force and military families did not begin with COVID, and they will not disappear at its end. If confirmed, I will assist Secretary Austin in bringing enduring, consistent focus to total force health and quality. We must address suicide and mental health, housing, childcare, and food insecurity. We must root out violent extremism, systemic racism, sexual assault and harassment, and other inhibitors to readiness. And this is a matter of readiness. We will not be able to attract and retain the world's finest force, one that represents our democracy, if we cannot hold accountable those who threaten its viability from within. The department must also manage its business operations efficiently and in line with performance goals. If confirmed, I would build on existing efforts to make clear and accountable progress toward a clean audit. I would also immediately assess the disposition of responsibilities previously assigned to the Chief Management Officer and make any adjustments needed. Our success in meeting these goals requires a regular and constructive dialogue between the Department and Congress. If confirmed, I will help Secretary Austin facilitate communication and exchange with you and your staff. The nation needs us to work together. Members of the committee, if confirmed, I would bring to these challenges a professional life spent committed to improving the nation's defense. I would bring an insider's knowledge of the levers for action and an outsider's drive for reform. I would bring a commitment to restoring healthy civil-military dynamics and establishing regular order. And I would be proud to put another crack in the glass ceiling of the department I have spent most of my adult life serving. Senators, I look forward to your questions and am grateful for this time with you today.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hicks. I'm going to cover 4 questions real quickly to kind of set this thing off. First of all, on the document that we've referred to, the National Defense Strategy Commission, to me, that tells the whole world the significance of the 12 people who put this document together that we've adhered to. Some people are saying that it's maybe already outdated since that was put together back in 2018. I would ask the question, does it? Well, first of all, there are a lot of things that people keep talking about on the floor and about climate change, and yet nowhere in the Commission's analysis can I find that phrase. So in your view, and given your experience as a member of the NDS Commission, does the 2018 NDS accurately assess the current strategic threat that we're faced with?
Senator, the 2018 NDS, I think, was a remarkable reflection of strong bipartisan consensus around the growing challenges presented by China in particular, and also the opportunistic challenges presented by Russia. And I think those factors continue to endure. The job of the National Defense Strategy Commission was to evaluate that NDS 2018. And Congress has established a requirement every 4 years for a new national defense strategy. I would imagine the Biden administration will be moving quickly to undertaking a full assessment, not only of the 2018 document and hopefully the Commission's recommendations, but also the current threat environment and other challenges we face. An example, in addition to climate, might be COVID, which did not appear in the 2018 document. The world changes, and we need to always be assessing our forces against the needs.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, one of the documents or statements in this document is we would need to establish a real growth of 3 to 5%. Do you still think that's a good goal?
Senator, I think that was an accurate reflection of what it would take in a ballpark way to meet the requirements of the 2018 NDS as it was laid out. So I stand by that as the general rule of thumb for that document.
Okay, and I'm going to cover two other areas real quickly here. One, I'm going to quote from this NDS. Quote, civilian voices have been relatively muted on issues at the center of the U.S. defense and national security policy, undermining the concept of civilian control. And we talked to General Austin about this also. Would you give kind of what concrete steps would you recommend to correct this if you agree with this statement?
I do agree with that statement, and Secretary Austin, Senator, has laid out already in his confirmation hearing, and my understanding is in the steps he's implementing in the department, several concrete approaches. One is about who is in the room, who has a seat at the table, and whose voices are engaged in major issues of force deployment and force operations, as well as policy. And he's been very clear that if confirmed, that would include me as the Deputy Secretary of Defense, his Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, when confirmed, would also be an important figure in that alongside other civilian officials.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And lastly, I want to mention the nuclear triad. This is something that many people agree is the most significant problem that we are faced with right now. We have both Russia and China. They're modernizing and expanding their nuclear forces, as well as North Korea and some others that are moving in that direction also. Secretary Austin has recused himself potentially for the entirety of his term as Secretary of Defense from any matter involving Raytheon Technologies. So understand that you will be making the decisions for DOD about the long-range standoff weapon, the ground-based support. I'd like to get you on record right now. Do you agree with the assessment of the past Secretaries of Defense, and I believe Secretary Austin as well, that the modernizing of the nation's nuclear forces is the most critical national security priority, and including, we're talking about the triad of land, air, and sea. Critics quite often talk about that as if that's you can get by with 2 out of 3, and I don't think you can. What's your thought?
Senator, I think first that nuclear deterrence is the cornerstone of American national security as long as there are nuclear threats out there, and there certainly are those. I also think the triad has been, as Secretary Austin has put it, the bedrock of our nuclear deterrent, and I think it must be modernized in order to be safe, secure, credible. And I would just add that I am worried about the state of the readiness of the nuclear triad, and if confirmed, that's an area I would want to get my team in place and start to look at right away.
That's excellent. Thank you. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Hicks. As I mentioned, transformation is going to be one of the key challenges you face, and I alluded to some of the obstacles. The services have favorite programs. There's a risk aversion to gaps and capabilities, and then there's also congressional unwillingness to sacrifice platforms that might be beneficial to their locality. So can you give us an idea of what specific actions you might take to accelerate this transformation and the challenges you anticipate facing?
Senator, I think one of the major areas to look at are what are the incentives for the services, obviously members of Congress, industry, other stakeholders, and how do we work on improving the alignment of those incentives to get the kinds of outcomes we need for the joint warfighter. One major area that I would like to explore, if confirmed, is on concepts and joint concepts. The Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has an effort underway already in that area. I think we can create more incentives to ensure that what we are pursuing in terms of capabilities actually line up to theories of victory for how we are trying to pace challenges from China and Russia.
And alluding to China and Russia and the National Defense Strategy, as you indicated, it will be revised shortly by the Biden administration. Are there any assumptions that you feel might have changed since the last version, and also operational concepts? This is not a static situation. Much has happened in the last several years on both sides, or all sides, I should say. Are there any, again, assumptions that you might sort of question or operational concepts that have changed so that it has an impact on the next fourth statement?
Senator, I think I would, if confirmed, need to get in and really look at the threat assessments in terms of what we're seeing from China, Russia, and others, as well as how the advancement of U.S. capabilities is going. There are obviously programs that I am not privy to in my current capacity that I would want to understand better how they're being integrated into departments thinking about operational concepts. I would say in general terms, areas that concern me are quantum computing advances, hypersonic missile capabilities and technology, and challenges perhaps to the U.S. asymmetric advantages in the undersea domain.
Well, that's very sensible, and I think focusing on threats as a driver of policy is probably the best way to begin, or not only policy but operational dispositions and force structure. All of those will be affected by what the threat is, and I think, again, any analysis has to begin with the assumptions, make sure we have them right. One of the other aspects of our national security response is the whole of government response. I think the National Defense Strategy Report is very much focused on the Department of Defense and the military response, but we have to, I believe, have a much stronger whole of government effort. Can you comment on that?
Yes, Senator. If we look at the challenges being presented today, the good news is that our strategic deterrent, in the case of nuclear weapons, appears to be holding. The conventional deterrent appears to largely be holding. The result of that strength, which is good for the American people, is that adversaries have to look below the threshold of conventional conflict, and we are seeing that. There are different terms people use: malign influence, gray zone threats, but certainly China and Russia in their ways have been pursuing these. Many of the solutions to those gray zone challenges, which come in the form of economic coercion, cyber threats, as we've seen very recently from Russia, threats even in space, a lot of the answers to those start in the civil society side. They start with the strength of American democracy. They start with our tools of statecraft and how we build alliances and partnerships to counter them. And the Defense Department is typically in support for many of those challenges.
Well, Doctor, I'm glad you alluded to your Irish roots. Since we're both Irish, we understand that our favorite hobby is worrying. And after you worry about your children, I'm sure you're going to devote most of the day to worrying about the Department of Defense. So I'm very confident you'll do a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Wicker. Senator Wicker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad there is more than one person worried in this room today. And thank you for your willingness to serve, and thank you for the conversation that we had early. I very much appreciate that. I enjoyed your testimony, and let me quote: China's military modernization is the pacing challenge of our time. Armed conflict between the United States and China is not desirable, and it is not inevitable. Would you also agree that it's not inconceivable?
I would agree with that, Senator.
Yes. Well, so let's worry about China, and particularly the Pacific, but also I want to ask you to be mindful of Russia and the Black Sea and that area of threat also. How do you view the growing imbalance of naval forces and missile systems between the United States and China?
Senator, I first believe the United States must have capable sea power. It must have a qualitative advantage over adversaries in order to protect its interest, advance its interest. I do want to just say, as an aside, that I thank this committee and the House Armed Services Committee for supporting the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. I think if confirmed, that's a tool that will be very helpful in building out some initiatives and capabilities in this area. My understanding from the outside, I'm not privy again to the information that's available were I to be confirmed, is that the Chinese have, of course, grown out the capacity of their Navy and their missile capability based in different domains, land-based, sea-based. And that's a very worrisome trend line. I'm concerned about the survivability of our naval forces, and I'm concerned about making sure we have them positioned and have a concept for operating them that can be a war-winning strategy.
Okay, the chairman had a conversation with you about the National Defense Strategy. That's now 3 years old and will be reviewed next year or perhaps earlier by the new administration. We have an FY22 30-year shipbuilding plan that was just released in December, so it's only 2 months old, and it calls for 405 manned ships by the year 2051. It would add 82 new ships between 2022 and 2026 at a cost of $147 billion. By comparison, the Navy's FY21 budget request projected to add only 44 ships as compared to 82 at a cost of $102 billion in the same time frame. In other words, the Navy's FY22 30-year shipbuilding plan shows an 86% increase in the number of ships the service would buy in the next 5 years and a 44% increase in funding of the same time frame. Now, I think you told me that you've seen the non-classified part of this plan, but not the classified. You'll soon be confirmed and see the classified. How controlling do you view this 30-year shipbuilding plan, which came from the previous administration, and what do you plan to prioritize with regard to shipbuilding in the Defense Department?
Senator, let me first say, from the plan that was released by the Trump administration in December, there's some really interesting operational themes that I'm attracted to. There's a focus on increasing use of autonomy. There's a focus on dispersal of forces, and there's a focus on growing the number of small surface combatants relative to today. But there are some things in that unclassified report, as I mentioned to you, that I saw as flags. There's an indication that the information in there would require further analysis to validate the numbers. So if confirmed, I would want to get in there, get my team together, certainly start to get our leadership for the Navy put in place on the civilian side and assess in accordance with the requirements that Congress has established for an FY22 shipbuilding plan, assess that last document from the Trump administration and make any adjustments necessary. Just wanted to add that I would absolutely welcome, if confirmed, the opportunity to work with members of this committee to talk through what we are seeing as we're thinking ahead to what that shipbuilding plan should be.
Okay, we will have further conversations about that, and I appreciate it. I also appreciate the fact that in a foreign affairs piece you wrote, you stressed that the U.S. will need to keep forces deployed overseas, especially in Asia and Europe. I agree with that. Much as we might like to have savings there, I think really the long-term savings and the long-term deterrence calls for that to continue. I'm going to ask you to briefly discuss if you've looked at the 2 additional destroyers at Rota, Spain, that are in the works at this point.
Senator, I haven't looked at the decision-making around that deployment. I'm aware that both of the value of Rota, and it's something that I would want to look into as part of a holistic look, not only at our maritime presence, but our overall global posture to make sure we have the right forces in the right places for the kinds of contingencies we anticipate.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you. Again, welcome. We're delighted that you're here. And we had the opportunity several weeks ago to talk about some of the challenges you will face if confirmed at DOD. And I was very parochial in that call because I talked about the critical aspects of New Hampshire's economy and our contributions to our national security. One of those is the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, which is between New Hampshire and Maine. And Senator Wicker talks about the importance of the shipbuilding plan, but that shipbuilding plan is only going to work as well as we have the capacity to make sure that our ships and subs are modernized and restored when something happens and we can keep them sailing. And I wonder if you can discuss the importance of the Navy shipyard infrastructure optimization plan, which is so important. Right now we're seeing a dramatic increase in dry dock capacity because of that plan at Portsmouth.
Thank you, Senator. I do think the sustainability, it's not just the shipbuilding, it's the sustainability of our fleet. And both of those aspects are incredibly important. We need to have modernized depot capacity and capability to include in our naval shipyards. So I agree that it's greatly important. I would need to, if confirmed, understand better how well the optimization plan is working. But I do think it appears from the outside that it's a step in the right direction to make sure we have that sustainable capacity.
Well, good. We'd love to have you come up and see it firsthand in Portsmouth, where we think it's working very well. We also talked about the 157th Air Refueling Wing that's at Pease Air National Guard Base, which you pointed out your husband had spent some time in
Yes.
at Pease when it was the former SAC command. And we're very proud that we were the first guard base to get those KC-46 tankers. Now, as you know, because of a variety of challenges, including the most recent related to the remote vision system, we are still waiting on those tankers to be operational. So will you commit to continuing to do everything you can to ensure that Boeing gets us those tankers operational as soon as possible?
I will, Senator.
Thank you very much. We also talked about the role of women in defense, and I pointed out, as you already knew, the passage of the Women, Peace, and Security Act, which is designed to try and make better use of the role that women can play, particularly in conflict zones around the world. Can you talk about why you think that's important?
Absolutely. Senator Shaheen, first I want to thank you for your work on the Women, Peace, and Security legislation. The evidence that exists to date indicates that when women are engaged in peace and security matters, that negotiated settlements and viable and enduring negotiated settlements are more likely to come out. What I understand the Defense Department has done already to put into place the legislative requirements is to have senior advisors at each of the combatant commands and some additional staffing within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. I think those are important steps. If confirmed, I would want to be able to understand how well that's working and what kind of voice those advisors and the folks who are staffing the Secretary of Defense have in major considerations of peace and security.
Well, thank you. I look forward to working with you on that. In response to, I think it was Senator Reed's question about how do we look at some of the big investments that we've made that may no longer be what we need to address the current times. You talked about changing the incentives that we have. Can you shed a little more light on, give me some examples of how you think that would work?
Sure. Inside the Defense Department, an example is that when a system, if you will, is reduced in number or money is shifted, that the service that has, given up the capacity or the capability often believes that they will lose out overall, and the incentive structure is built around budget share. I think, first of all, we should make clear always from a leadership perspective that the incentive is about serving the joint warfighter, and we need to make sure we're hiring and promoting, particularly in the senior general officer and flag officer ranks and our career civilians, that perspective. So the incentives start around promotion, but they also include how we keep the money, if you will, oriented towards services who are putting forward good ideas, even if those good ideas seem to go against a vested interest. I think when you're talking beyond the Defense Department, first the incentive and engagements between the department and Congress have to do with having a dialogue. and not the department presenting its own fait accompli upon Congress. I think instead it's about a dialogue of how we move these joint capabilities forward and what kinds of approaches can be taken to help communities, to help different parts of the design base or manufacturing base. Sometimes those solutions might be internal to DoD, and sometimes they might be about other initiatives across the U.S. government, and that's where DoD will need to work closely with its partners in the Department of Commerce and other state and local governments, small business initiatives, to make sure we are part of the, as President Biden puts it, the Build Back Better set of initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Now, via WebEx, Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hicks, I appreciated our discussion of the importance of nuclear modernization yesterday, and I'd like to revisit a few of the questions in order to confirm your support for the record. First, I do thank you for that support for maintaining an effective nuclear triad of land, air, and sea-based platforms. Do you also support modernizing this triad as well as the infrastructure at the Department of Energy and the command and control networks on which our nuclear forces depend?
I do.
And do you believe the reemergence of great power competition makes nuclear deterrence and therefore nuclear modernization increasingly important compared to previous eras?
I think it makes it, remains the cornerstone.
Do you believe reductions in nuclear forces should be made pursuant to a negotiated, verifiable agreement? In other words, not unilaterally.
I do, Senator.
And do you believe the costs of our nuclear forces, which including modernization, sustainment, and operations, would consume less than 6.5% of the department budget at their peak, and that is manageable?
Senator, I think our decisions on nuclear weapons should be driven foremost by strategy.
Thank you. Dr. Hicks, with the change in the administration, opponents of nuclear weapons are renewing their arguments against elements of the triad and modernization programs, in particular the ICBM leg and the associated modernization program known as the GBSD. In 2012, when you were in the department, this committee was considering your nomination to be the Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Policy. You stated in a written response for the record, quote, "Single warhead ICBMs contribute to stability," end quote. Is that still your view?
Senator Fisher, may I ask you to repeat the statement? I couldn't hear the quote.
Okay. The quote was, "Single warhead ICBMs contribute to stability."
I do agree with that statement.
Some advocates are calling on the president to put modernization programs on pause while they are reviewed. I find this especially concerning because what sounds like an innocent concept has the potential to break the recapitalization schedule. We've repeatedly heard from STRATCOM commanders that there is no additional margin in the schedule for further delay. Admiral Richard, the current STRATCOM commander, in his posture statement last year testified, quote, "Many of the modernization and sustainment efforts necessary to ensure the deterrence viability have zero schedule margin and are late to need," end quote. And he went on to state, quote, "We cannot afford more delays and uncertainty in delivering capabilities, and we must maintain a focus on revitalizing our nuclear forces and associated infrastructure," end quote. That's been the consistent message since the Obama administration. We have already delayed and we have deferred these programs as much as possible. And if we don't proceed with urgency, these capabilities will age out and their replacements, they won't be available. That's something the last two administrations found completely unacceptable. Do you agree that allowing these capabilities to age into obsolescence is unacceptable?
Senator, I I was having a little trouble hearing you. I think the way I would respond to that is that I am concerned, again, about the modernization of the force. I very much respect Admiral Richards. I think STRATCOM has an important voice at this table, should be respected and listened to. If confirmed, I would need to get in and understand exactly what the status is and, to your point, the margin of error. I don't think we should be risking the modernization of our deterrent where that modernization actually challenges the quality of our strategic deterrent.
And Dr. Hicks, our nuclear weapons production infrastructure, much of it dates back to World War II era Manhattan Project. It's atrophied to the point where the United States is the only nuclear armed country in the world without the ability to produce a new weapon. Do you believe that the United States must rebuild and maintain the basic capabilities to design, manufacture, and sustain an effective nuclear weapons stockpile to support our nation's deterrent?
I do.
Thank you. I see my time's almost up. I appreciate your thoughtfulness. I appreciate your knowledge, and I look forward to you serving in this capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your service to our nation, Dr. Hicks. I want to join in thanking former Secretary Gates as well as my colleague, Senator Shaheen, for their excellent introductions, and welcome your husband, Tom, as well as possibly your two sisters in West Hartford and your brother in New Haven, if they are listening. If not, please convey my regards to them. And they must be very proud of you, as is your whole family, for your very distinguished service. I want to just begin with a comment because I read your remarks on the issue of sexual assault, which are very general. I will just be very blunt. As you know, this committee is accustomed to hearing very general remarks on this issue. For as long as I've been in the Senate, which is now 10 years, we've been hearing the same kind of generalities. And I don't mean to be rude, but sometimes they sound like good intentions, but a lot less action than there should be. So I'm hoping that your commitment on that issue will be sincere, vigorous, and aggressive, as I expect it will be. Likewise, on the issue of white supremacy, I'm very heartened by the remarks made by Secretary Austin, as well as yourself on this issue, because I think that extremist ideology in the military, as in any other phase of life, has to be fought and overcome. I want to focus on the issue of the defense industrial base. As you and I discussed yesterday, the number of suppliers, for example, in the submarine program has diminished substantially over recent years, from about 17,000 in the period of a couple of decades ago to now 5,000, a 70% decrease. Those numbers come from a recent GAO report. I raised them yesterday in a call with Electric Boat. They are extremely alarming to me. Your remarks indicate your commitment to aiding the small suppliers who are now struggling as a result of the pandemic and the economic crisis, but also developing new suppliers, returning the numbers of small startups and medium-sized companies. And you remark that efforts so far have, quote, not yet led to the level of dynamism in the industrial base that we need, end quote. So I'm hoping that you will focus on the supply chain that is so vitally important to major contractors like Electric Boat or Raytheon or any of our major sources of supply.
Yes, Senator, if I may step back to address the first part of your comments on sexual assault. I can assure you, as a woman in modern American workplace and certainly in national security, I too get tired of hearing a lot of talk that doesn't convert into actual change. I am very heartened by the fact that President Biden moved out quickly on this issue. with his 90-day effort, and then Secretary Austin moved out himself inside the department with his memo. I was absolutely appalled, and I think anyone who reads that Fort Hood report would feel the same as I do at the failures we've experienced to date on sexual assault. And I think all good ideas should be on the table. We shouldn't be taking things off the table while we're looking for the best solutions. On your point about consolidation of the industrial base, yes, I am concerned. Some consolidation is probably inevitable. The Defense Department isn't sized, if you will, in many areas to maintain a large base. But extreme consolidation does create challenges for innovation. My point on dynamism, you need to have a lot of different good ideas out there. That's our comparative advantage over authoritarian states like China and Russia. And so if we move all competition out, obviously that's a challenge both for the taxpayer, but it's also a challenge in terms of the innovation piece. So I would be happy, if confirmed, Senator, to work with you and your team on ways we can look at key parts of the industrial base and how we ensure there's a healthy supply chain.
Thank you very much. Just one last question on the issue of climate change and energy efficiency. You and I discussed this issue at some length. We don't have time today to continue that conversation, but I do hope to continue it. And very excitingly, you mentioned the idea of our fleet going possibly to electric power. Not surprising, given that automobile manufacturers are moving inexorably and quickly in that direction. GM very shortly will have an all-electric fleet, and maybe the Department of Defense can pursue that initiative as well. I see no reason why the Department of Defense can't have a fleet of vehicles that is all electric within the very foreseeable future. Would you agree?
Yes, President Biden in his executive order last week included a requirement on electric vehicle fleets, and if confirmed, that would be something I would want to work on right away to determine the viability of that, the timeline for that for DOD.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Now, via WebEx, Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mrs. Hicks, Dr. Hicks, for your appearance today, and congratulations on your nomination. I gotta say, I'm heartened by what I've heard you say to Senator Inhofe and Senator Fisher about our nuclear triad and our nuclear strategic deterrent, and with Senator Fisher in particular about the ground-based strategic deterrent, the replacement for the Minuteman III. I do want to get a little more specific about that because it's 50 years old, and we've seen problems with structural fatigue and water intrusion and decayed wiring. The GAO has warned that we could lose confidence in the fleet by 2026, a mere 5 years from now. Congress has fully funded the GBSD, its replacement system, and both military and civilian leaders have consistently warned that the service life extension of the Minuteman III is no longer an option. Given that we have, until recent years, put off nuclear modernization for so long, and the threats rising with China's crashed nuclear buildup and Russia's unconstrained tactical weapon inventory, Dr. Hicks, I want to know if you will fully commit to the deployment of the GBSD on its planned schedule.
Senator, I'll say again that I believe the triad has been a bedrock for American security, and I am a big believer in the value of the nuclear deterrent. What I can't say today, and until I have an opportunity, if I'm confirmed, to get in and understand the state, just as you are describing the state of the various legs of the triad, in this case, the state of the land-based component, it's difficult for me to assess exactly what the timeline and the margin, if you will, is, and also the technical feasibility issues, not just resource issues, but technical feasibility issues. But what I can promise is I am committed to a modernized, qualitatively effective deterrent. And if confirmed, I'd be happy to work with members here on a discussion around what we're seeing and what those timelines look like, and making sure that the FY22 budget pushes forward the President's commitment to that nuclear deterrent at the same time that it's promoting America's non-proliferation agenda.
That commitment to the deterrent includes the ground-based leg of the deterrent, correct?
Yes, Senator, I believe that our deterrent is strongest as a triad. I understand that there will be a relook, as there is in every administration, at the various aspects of nuclear policy and modernization. I think that's appropriate. The Trump administration did that as well. But if you're asking my personal view, my view is that the triad has served us very well. It has created stability, and it has a value.
And I can understand your hesitation to make the commitment of the deployment on time, given the Pentagon's long history of many programs running over time and over budget. So let's divide the reasons in half why you wouldn't make that commitment. One is the policy reason that some in the administration, some in the Democratic Party, don't want to modernize the missile leg of triad. And then there's all the concerns about, as you say, the technical feasibility, where the program is, its financing, and so forth. Is it the second concern that you have that causes you to hesitate towards making commitment towards on-time delivery as opposed to the first, the ideological or the policy one?
Senator, as a nominee for Deputy Secretary of Defense, I probably think of myself mostly in the former category in general. Yes, I would be very much focused on the viability of the programming element of this, and I would be in support of the Secretary, of course, on the major policy issues regarding nuclear posture, where he seeks my advice. But as I said in my opening statement, I think my job is to make sure we can execute on the President's direction and on Secretary Austin's direction.
Okay. Well, if confirmed, I certainly hope that'll be a very top priority to make sure all those programmatic issues permit for the on-time deployment of something critical to our national security. Dr. Hicks, you suggested something in your answer that I want to touch on as well, about a posture review. Will the Biden administration conduct a nuclear posture review, as has been the custom for the last several new presidential administrations?
Senator Cotton, that is my understanding. I don't, because I'm not inside the administration, I don't know the status of that, but it is my understanding that there is an intention to review nuclear posture as well as, of course, overall defense strategy. The latter part is a congressionally mandated requirement.
Thank you. One final question. Like all administrations in the nuclear age, to include the Obama administration, will the Biden administration decline to adopt a no first use policy for nuclear weapons?
Senator, I can't speak to how the Biden administration might ultimately come through its policy assessments with regard to either nuclear declaratory policy or other issues. I have been on the record in the past as not being, I don't believe no first use policy is necessarily in the best interest of the United States, but those will be decisions ultimately made, of course, by the President.
Well, thank you. I hope you'll be a vocal voice for that and that people will listen to you.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Now, via WebEx, Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much, Doctor, for being here. I want to continue along the line of argument that I listened to from Senator Blumenthal, and you did say that you reviewed the Fort Hood investigative report. In that report, there was a significant recommendation, and it said that commander negligence at Fort Hood fostered a culture of violent crime, sexual assault, and harassment. The investigators provided a solution, quote, to ensure objectivity and fairness. The sexual harassment and assault response, or SHARP program, should operate independent from local commands and their legal advisors. Dr. Hicks, do you think that if local commanders are not trusted to oversee SHARP, that they should still get to decide which sexual assaults and complex criminal cases should go forward to be prosecuted?
Senator Gillibrand, let me just first thank you for your leadership in general on this issue. As the Fort Hood report makes very clear, even just in the one excerpt you've given, this is a problem that doesn't appear to be getting any better. And we need to be really open, I think, on the solutions, the levers that will actually make a difference. I am not a legal expert. I can't speak to the specifics of how the department at this point, you know, without being in the department, how the department ought to move forward on those recommendations, and in particular on the accountability side, prosecution and accountability side. But what I can say is that to the extent that Secretary Austin is involving me in decisions relating to countering sexual assault and harassment in the military, that I'm very open to ideas, even if they include removing the commander from that prosecution chain.
Mm-hmm. And the purpose of that would be to give the prosecution to trained military prosecutors who have had time to develop expertise in criminal law, because right now fewer cases are proceeding to trial and fewer cases are ending in conviction. And so as a result, we've seen a lessening of people's faith in the system. And the one recommendation that survivors and legal expert and advocates have recommended is allowing the professionalization of the prosecution of major crimes that have jail time of more than a year. And so that's why this is the recommendation. And for your benefit, we've put forward pretty much every other recommendation that the DoD has supported and turned it into law, and they have not changed these outcomes. And the second thing that doesn't seem to matter is whether a Secretary of Defense takes this seriously or not, because every single one of them has said they've taken it seriously from Dick Cheney on. And so promises, empty promises, are something that I hope the Biden administration does not tolerate. And I would like your commitment that you will really focus on this issue to make sure that we get to the right result, where we can have a military justice system that is worthy of the sacrifices that the men and the women in our services make every single day.
Senator, you have that commitment.
Okay. I'd like to address now issues of cybersecurity. Last month, it came to light that Russia had created a backdoor into computers of at least 250 agencies for 9 months, and possibly still, they've been able to monitor computer activity and steal data that has come to our attention. So a private company, FireEye, brought that to our attention, not the DoD. This comes only after 2 years that our cyber posture review found that we've had difficulties with DoD cyberspace operations' ability to prevent malign activity from our adversaries. Now, we've had several hearings on this, and we've had lots of proposed changes. One proposal is to increase the role of the National Guard so that cybersecurity experts can maintain their day jobs while also serving the country. Do you think this is a tool that could be useful for this problem?
Senator, I think the National Guard can bring specialized capabilities in exactly these types of areas where the commercial sector, to your point about FireEye, where the commercial sector is sometimes out in front of the federal government. So it does seem to be at first glance that the National Guard could be helpful in this area.
Last, I wanted to touch on diversity. Recently, the DoD released a 2017 survey that showed 24.4% of active duty minority service members experienced harassment or discrimination, but only 26% reported their experience to the Equal Opportunity Program. Only 16% of reports led to punishment of the perpetrator, and 10% somehow led to punishment of the reporter. While interviewing Anthony Brown last July, you stated the military is a, quote, engine to counter racism. With statistics like this, do you think that engine is actually working? And would you agree that service members should have the same ability to report discrimination without reprisal as a civilian DoD employee?
Senator, I hesitate to get into specific recommendations related to UCMJ or other legal matters. If confirmed, I would absolutely want to speak to the career lawyers to understand what the implications are. But to your general point, I think it is crystal clear that the military has not undertaken sufficient efforts on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that we have a major leadership challenge, quite frankly. We have a problem on the prevention side, and we clearly have a problem on holding folks accountable, whether it's sexual harassment and assault or it's DEI-related issues more broadly. And I am committed to making sure we make genuine progress. I know it's difficult to hear nominee after nominee come up and say that, but you have my commitment, and I would look forward to working with you on both of these sets of issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. And via WebEx, Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hicks, thank you for your years of service and the work that you've done in national security issues. I want to thank you for your willingness to serve once again in such an important position. I enjoyed our phone call last week, and I want you to know that I intend to support your nomination. I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to go through with you, specifically with regard to our DoD cyber strategy, which had been published back in December of 2018, which charges the DoD to defend forward, shape the day-to-day competition, and prepare for war. The United States Cyber Command has demonstrated successful instances of defend forward in securing the 2018 and 2020 elections. What are your views on the defend forward, shape the day-to-day competition, and prepare for war concepts to deter and disrupt Russia and China in cyberspace?
Senator, first, thank you very much for your support of my nomination. I have had an opportunity at different periods in the last several years to get a little more information on what's behind Defend Forward. I would say, based on the briefings that I have had, I am supportive of the approach. I think if confirmed, what I would like to understand better is exactly how the authorities are being executed, what kind of oversight is involved, how we are consulting with allies and partners, whose systems we might operate on. I think those are very important questions for civilian policymakers to be engaged on. But in general, I believe that we have had to become much more forward-leaning in our approach, and I also think Congress has a critical role to play here in terms of authorities, and I would want to understand better, again, how it's being executed today to engage in a dialogue about what is the appropriate role for Congress and for civilians, policymakers in the executive branch.
I'm also very pleased by the progress that we've made enabling Cybercom to rapidly conduct cyber effects operations to include offensive cyber operations. Can you tell the American people why this is so important to our national defense? I think it's important that the public understand that we've got challenges with people attacking us, but we have to be in a position to offer offensive cyber operations even when we're not in an identified conflict.
Yes, Senator, I think one of the major challenges about thinking through competition or confrontations in cyberspace is that the classic definitions of what is offense and what is defense are very blurred. And so it is challenging to use the kind of constructs we've thought of in a terrestrial sense in cyberspace. What I would say to your point is the way in which adversaries can come at our systems, and the recent Russian hacks, to include through SolarWinds, demonstrated this, is they can live in our systems for some time. They can undertake espionage, extract information, and then can turn, in many cases, onto what we would think of as offensive approaches. In order for the U.S. to prevent that and deter that, it also sometimes has to defend forward. That is to say, it has to be living in systems so that it has the warning, the indicators and warning to know that an attack is imminent. And that's where this offensive piece becomes important.
Exactly, and not only that, but it also provides us with advance warning about the types of tactics that might very well be used, because if they're using those tactics in other countries in advance, they may very well be using the same tactics when it comes to trying to get into our systems as well. As we discussed during our call, there was an effort in the last administration to end the Cybercom NSA dual hat. Again, I've been watching this issue for a number of years now, and I'm really concerned by that. I had originally come in thinking that it would be appropriate to split them up rather quickly. I changed my mind. I think that the dual hat, with the unity of command it provides, is working very well for the current and likely for future Cybercom commanders. Now, separating the two organizations could create some real problems with regard to the assets that would have to be acquired in addition to what we have today. Would you please share your thoughts on this with the committee?
Yes, Senator, I don't have a position on the ultimate disposition of the dual hat arrangement for Cybercom and NSA. I do have an assessment based on my work on the transition team looking at where we are today, and particularly in light of this recent hack that included exploitation of the SolarWinds software. And that is that we are not at a maturation point now with Cybercom that makes the dual an end to the dual hat arrangement wise in the immediate. And if confirmed, I would be happy to continue, of course, looking at this issue and giving Secretary Austin my best advice on, if there comes a point where that does seem to be, the split does seem to be wise.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Now, via WebEx, Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Dr. Hicks. Thank you for chatting with me the other day. I start with the following two questions of every nominee who comes before any of the committees on which I sit. First question, since you became an adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
I note in your responses to questions from my colleagues that you recognize the importance of the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, and that includes the importance of the compacts that we have with the freely associated states of Micronesia, Palau, and Marshall Islands. I believe that we can do more in our partnerships with them, and I hope that you will be open to, for example, Palau has asked us to invest in joint use facilities such as airfields and airfields. So I hope that you'll be open to doing more with our important partners in the Pacific.
Senator, I am open to that.
I do applaud Secretary Austin's recent announcement that the Pentagon will prioritize climate change considerations in its activities, risk assessments, and in the next National Defense Strategy. I believe that renewable energy is not simply an environmental calculation, but it is becoming a tactical necessity for the DoD, which is the biggest user of energy in our government. So we have included provisions in NDAA to prioritize energy security and resilience at military installations. And I'd like to know whether you will make energy resilience and mission assurance a priority for the DoD.
Yes, Senator, I think the resiliency aspects on climate are critical as a business proposition for DoD, again, focused really, if you just take a hard-nosed resource look at it. And I want to commend Congress for reestablishing the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Energy Installations and Environment. If confirmed, I would work with Secretary Austin, to ensure that we put forward a nominee who's very capable and competent in these exact spaces.
I think the issue of energy resilience and all of that is we have to stay the course. Senator Shaheen had asked you about the importance of our shipyards, and she said it's a parochial concern, but it is not. I view it as a national concern, and of course I chatted with you about the importance of the 4 public shipyards, of which there is one in Hawaii. And so the modernization of these shipyards is a very important concern for a number of us, and I hope that I have your commitment that you will continue to support the funding for the modernization of our shipyards. Because it's, as you acknowledge, it's not enough to just build ships. We actually have to repair and maintain them.
Yes, I agree completely, Senator. The sustainability of all of our forces, frankly, especially if you look at where the cost curves are on operations and sustainment, that's going to be vital if we're going to compete effectively in the future.
Senator Blumenthal and Gillibrand have asked you questions about the continuing scourge of sexual assault harassment, and I would include retaliation on the basis of reporting, somebody who reports these kinds of actions. And It continues to be a scourge, as I mentioned, and every secretary, every deputy, everybody who comes before us from DOD says that you will do something about it. So I'd like to know, what would be measures of progress in this area? How would you determine whether real progress is being made to eliminate or reduce the scourge of sexual assault, harassment, and retaliation?
Senator, I think first, one of the most important tools we could have is transparency and data. And as you are likely aware, the department has not collected recent data with regard to reporting on sexual harassment, we know how many claims, if you will, have been made, but we don't know the totality of the reporting. If you look again at the Fort Hood report, if you look at that microcosm of the Fort Hood community, it was very clear it was significant underreporting underway. And so I think that's an area we'd want to look at right away in terms of making clear that reporting does not have negative consequences for the career of anyone in the total force, civilians, contractors, or military. And that there are tools, easy tools, hotlines that are easy to use, that everyone knows about, that the training is there. And then I would just add sort of the training element. A lot of these harassment is often the grooming process toward assault. So we have to look at both of those issues. And a lot of this is happening in the youngest of our service members. And that means there's training opportunities. That means there's leadership opportunities at every level. And we need to be making sure we're holding folks accountable at the same time we're putting the resources into prevention.
That's why it's important to have sexual harassment as a separate charge in these matters. And maybe another way to determine the extent of the problem is to poll your service members themselves as to whether they have experienced sexual harassment, assault, etc., including, by the way, asking them about racial discrimination. I believe my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.